Chapter 41 Cats and Bats, Part 2. When Schiller saw Bruce's dark aura and his gloomy, frustrated expression, he knew that his conversation with Catwoman was unlikely to go well. "You guys aren't going to start fighting again, are you?" Bruce said. "It's worse than that." "Okay. So which ward is she in now?" Schiller asked. "I mean, the situation in Gotham is worse than I thought. There's a group of bad people here that you can't criticize because they've done enough in this environment," Bruce said. "I think you should realize by now that being Batman isn't such a simple thing," Schiller said. "Indeed," Bruce said. "I thought I had a tough suit of armor, a helmet that could stop bullets, sharp batarangs, guns and bullets. With all that, what gang couldn't I take on?" "The gun is indeed very useful," Schiller said. "At least it guarantees that someone will be willing to listen to what you say." "I can't tell Selina you're wrong," Bruce said, covering his eyes. "She's actually done enough. Jonathan probably doesn't think so. If I told you now that Jonathan also grew up in this kind of environment, and that the crimes he committed were because no one taught him, what would you think?" Bruce opened his mouth, realizing that he had initially thought he was just, but later he learned that nothing is absolutely just. He thought he was at least fair, but now he found that he didn't seem fair enough. He had to admit that he was biased towards Selina. Many of the gangsters he punished were just like Catwoman Selina, only less fortunate than her. Their families and pasts were a mess. They worked for gangs not because they were vicious villains or born bad, but simply to make a living. Breaking free from the constraints of one's birth class is far more difficult than one might imagine, especially in Gotham. This fact made Bruce feel somewhat desperate. He finally understood why Schiller said he didn't understand Gotham. Because anyone who wants to completely save Gotham doesn't understand Gotham. Everyone here is a bad person, yet there isn't a single bad person here. Among this group of zombie-like people, you won't find a single person who should be saved, nor will you find a single person who was born to be eliminated. There is no culprit here. Everyone here is the culprit. This path to heroism was completely different from what Bruce had envisioned. He believed that as long as he captured enough criminals, extracted information from them, and then followed the clues to find the few cancerous elements that had been affecting Gotham, and finally brought them to justice, Gotham would become better and better. But now he realizes it's a bottomless pit. When he takes down one group of cancerous tumors, another will appear. When he punishes one culprit, another will always emerge. No one can withstand such a drain, and this doesn't refer to wealth or physical health. Harvey believes that it's not only those who reach the finish line who win, but Batman, he doesn't even have a finish line. Bruce now realizes that his struggle against Gotham will consume his entire life. Then he realized that wealth, equipment, and fighting skills could not make him the real Batman, because his greatest enemy was not criminals, but giving up. His biggest problem wasn't how cunning his opponents were, but whether he was resolute enough to dedicate his entire life to endlessly wasting away with a city that couldn't be saved. It's like an ordinary person spending their entire life trying to make the sun rise in the west. Batman stood on the roof of Gotham Central Building. The wind was strong, howling past his ears. Below him were countless mediocre villains, like a swarm of ants building a nest. From here, he could clearly see everything in Gotham. Batman originally thought Gotham was devoid of order, filled only with chaos. But now he discovers that it not only possesses order, but it is also more robust than anywhere else. If there were only chaos, he could rebuild order, but now he cannot even break Gotham's existing order. After a while, Batman heard footsteps behind him, and Catwoman walked over with her hands behind her back. Seeing Batman turn around, she smiled, took out a gem from behind her back, and handed it to Batman with a grin, saying, "I picked out a very pretty little treasure for my collection. Of course, I'm reluctant to give you the biggest one, but I think this one is pretty good too." Before Bruce could speak, Catwoman said, "I was talking to Maggie yesterday, and she said I should apologize to you because I shouldn't have cut you with a dagger, no matter what. I've never apologized to anyone. If someone wants to beat me up, I beat them up back. But I feel like you've been really good to me, even taking me for a drive to the top of a tall building, and yet I stabbed you in the back. That doesn't seem right." She blinked her beautiful, large brown eyes, which gleamed in the Gotham-like darkness, and said, "I can tell you're troubled. I hope this gem will make you feel better." Batman glanced down at the gem in his hand. It was a triangular ruby, somewhat resembling his ear, exquisitely cut, and possessed a captivating luster even in the dim light. For the first time, he realized that this was not a mineral that was meaningless to humans except for its appearance. Batman asked, "Would you like to hear my story?" On the other end of the line, Schiller was on the phone saying, "Medical parole? How did he get it approved? I don't want to blame you, but the Gotham Police Department is really being too frivolous." He thought about it and realized that the Gotham Police Department really had no bottom line left to fall. Then he said to Gordon on the other end, "I hope he stays in the hospital and doesn't come back to cause trouble. You know, I'm not Batman." Gordon hung up the phone and sighed. He knew it wouldn't be that simple. Despite Jonathan's efforts, he was still sent to an asylum. Victor was missing and Lantelos was dead. However, the former president of Gotham University was granted medical parole and did not go to prison. He had been in Gotham for so many years and had some connections, so he ultimately succeeded. Schiller never hesitated to think of a Gotham citizen in the worst possible light. And he knew that the old principal would not let the matter rest so easily. Sure enough, the next day, just as Schiller was about to leave work, a girl rushed into her office in a panic. This was the same girl who had complained to the school about Christine's disappearance. She was Christine's good friend. "Christine has disappeared again?" Schiller asked. "It's worse than that," the girl said anxiously. "Ever since then, Christine gave me a safe number. She told me that if this number calls my cell phone, it means she might be in danger." Schiller quickened his packing and asked, "When did this happen?" "Just 3 minutes ago." The call went through, but there was no sound on the other end. Schiller comforted the girl, then called Bruce and said, "Bad news. Christine's in trouble again. I don't know if Gordon told you? The old headmaster got medical parole and didn't go to jail. If he wants revenge, the first person he'll target is the one who testified against him." Bruce immediately returned to Wayne Manor, donned all of Batman's gear, and since he was the one who persuaded Christine to testify against the principal, he had to save the girl. Unfortunately, this time the old principal was smarter. He didn't use any low-level gangsters this time, but hired professional kidnappers. They left no trace. It seems that the old principal simply wanted revenge, rather than using her to threaten others. But this precisely illustrates that Christine is likely in an extremely dangerous environment. A while later, Batman received a call from Schiller, who said, "The main street where the Red Ravens used to be located in the east side, the drug den you destroyed." Before Bruce could ask why, Schiller hung up the phone, and Batman sped off, racing through the Gotham night. But he doesn't have the Batmobile yet. Ordinary sports cars aren't fast enough, and it would take a while to get from Wayne Manor to the East End. Christine could be harmed at any moment, and although he doesn't like Christine, he doesn't want to see an innocent person tragically murdered. Batman slammed his fist on the steering wheel, realizing he desperately needed a better vehicle. Suddenly, an unexpected number called. Catwoman's voice came through the phone. "Hey, I think I saw your girlfriend who's always waiting for you on the street. What's going on? Why are they heading towards Maple Leaf Avenue? It's dangerous there. She's been kidnapped. You have to find a way to save her. No, can you keep an eye on them? Watch them from a distance, then call me." "Never mind. No, don't follow them. Just tell me where they went." "You sound like you need help," Catwoman said. Batman seemed a little impatient. He said, "This is none of your business. Just don't go out and cause me any trouble tonight." After saying that, he hung up the phone and drove towards Maple Leaf Avenue. After a while, Batman appeared at the end of Maple Street, which was indeed the former headquarters of the Red Crow Gang. He had destroyed a den for manufacturing and producing poppies there. Batman had a good memory. He walked along the right side of the street and then turned into 2 alleys. As soon as he reached the end of the alley, he heard a fierce fight and gunshots coming from inside. Batman quickly found the back door, picked the lock, and went inside. There was a group of thugs lying haphazardly outside, all groaning in pain, seemingly hit by joint locks. Passing through the gatehouse into the living room, you can see 7 or 8 masked kidnappers lying on the ground, a whip whistling through the air, almost hitting Batman. Catwoman turned around and said, "Thank God. The little girl is all right." Batman turned his gaze to Christine on the sofa. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, and if Catwoman hadn't arrived in time, something bad might have really happened. Then Catwoman sniffed, frowned, and said, "Wait, why do I smell oil? Is your car leaking oil?" "No, oh no. It might be a Molotov cocktail. Let's get out of here." Before she could finish speaking, the glass at the main entrance was smashed, and countless Molotov cocktails wrapped in cloth were thrown in. The flames roared up in an instant. Inside this abandoned hideout, there were many fabric sofas, curtains, and other flammable materials. Before long, the fire became extremely fierce. Bruce carried the unconscious Christine, and as soon as they reached the back door, they found that the back door, which had been pried open, had been blocked by heavy objects from the outside. Clearly, this was a premeditated trap. Batman's suit is fireproof, but if it continues to burn like this, Christine and Catwoman will be in danger. Moreover, fireproof suits don't mean they're resistant to smoke inhalation. The fire is getting bigger and bigger, and the thick black smoke makes it almost impossible to see anything in the room. Everyone is coughing repeatedly. Suddenly, a crisp clang came from the right, as if something had fallen. Catwoman reacted quickly and lashed out with her whip, but when she dragged it back, she found it was a fire extinguisher. Regardless of where the fire extinguisher came from, Catwoman shook it vigorously. Batman said, "Go from where they threw the Molotov cocktail. There should be a vacuum zone there." Batman led the way with a fire extinguisher, while Catwoman supported Christine from behind. Sure enough, the person who threw the Molotov cocktail used a lot of force, causing it to land in the center of the hall, rather than in front of the door. Apart from a small rug, there was nothing flammable in front of the door. Batman used a fire extinguisher to put out the flames that were coming towards them, and the two of them rushed forward. Upon reaching the door, Batman first shot the lock, then began ramming the iron door with all his might. The person who threw the Molotov cocktail was clearly in a hurry, and the front door wasn't blocked as tightly as the back door. Batman rammed the front door a few times and managed to open a crack. But this also meant that the air was starting to circulate, and the fire was getting bigger. Catwoman was almost choking and passing out. Batman could clearly feel his hand on his shoulder starting to slide down. Once they lost consciousness, she and Christine would surely die. Batman used all his strength and slammed the door open with a loud bang. The three escaped. Catwoman gasped for breath. Both Batman and Catwoman were covered in soot and grime. After dropping Christine off, Batman asked Catwoman, who was sitting in the passenger seat, as he drove, "Why did you rush in to save Christine? That was dangerous, wasn't it?" Catwoman was still excitedly looking at the interior of the luxury car. Clearly, she had never ridden in such an expensive car before. She cleared her throat to calm herself down, and after a while, she said, "Actually, I just thought of a lot of reasons why you should praise me, such as that I plan to learn from you and be a good person, that I am actually a righteous heroine at heart, or that I can't stand those kidnappers harming innocent people." Then Catwoman looked at him, and when Batman was stared at by those brown eyes, he felt his heart pounding again. "You don't want me to do bad things, but I really love those gems so much. So, I can do one bad thing and then do one good thing, isn't that enough?" "Okay. Actually, I just wanted to cheer you up," Catwoman said with a shrug. "I know I can't become any great hero. I just like stealing. It's a habit I've had since I was a child. I'm not good at preaching. Maybe that girl who's always waiting for you on the street is much better than me. After all, she's highly educated, beautiful and charming, and very innocent and naive. She's never done anything bad. But that's just how I am. I never think about those things. I just do what I want to do. You can think of me as a criminal or as an incorrigible bad person. I am who I am. This is me, a cat." Batman's grip on the steering wheel loosened slightly. He didn't know if this was the answer he wanted, but he knew that the Catwoman's romance, vivacity, and sincerity were not the fundamental reasons he fell in love with her. A bat falls in love with a cat, but he only envies her freedom, a freedom he, as a Dark Knight, can never attain. He has made up his mind to fight this hopeless city to the bitter end. Watching the luxury car slowly come to a stop at the intersection, Schiller on the rooftop said to the symbiote in his mind, "No, we can't go down. What's coming next is not something children should see." The symbiote emitted a series of dissatisfied gurgling sounds. "Yes, I know you did a great job just now. You grabbed a fire extinguisher from the coffee shop across the street and threw it in with great accuracy. But what happens inside the car is just a meaningless process of human reproduction. You symbiotes don't need this process. You just need to shed your ash." The symbiote fell silent, and Schiller didn't know if he had understood. Schiller shifted his gaze from the luxury car to the dimly lit night in Gotham. Perhaps this is a hopeless city, and perhaps Batman is just an ordinary person who feels despair and confusion, he thought. But Batman is not alone, and never will be. The group has been created. Just click Apply to join the group below the profile. Chapter 42 New Job Offer. In a small bar on the outskirts of Gotham City's wealthy south side, Schiller squeezed a bit of lemon juice into his gin, raised his glass, and said to Gordon, "Congratulations, detective. At least now you can do what you want." Bruce, sitting across the table, also raised his glass. Harvey, after raising his glass, said, "It's definitely time to celebrate. You're the most honest cop I've ever met." The four clinked their glasses, and Gordon took a sip of his drink. His face was flushed. Whether from excitement or the alcohol, it was hard to tell. He said, "The more this happens, the more I know how far I still have to go." Bruce said, "It's always good to make progress." Schiller smiled, covered his mouth with his wine glass, and said, "Really? It seems our innocent little boy has made great progress lately." Bruce put down his glass and said, "I remember you once said, Professor, that you have no advice for my personal life. But I also warned you to be careful with your kidneys. I mean, protect your kidneys, not just avoid surgery." The scenery on Trike Street is indeed impressive. Its neon lights are famous throughout the East Coast. Gordon's eyes darted back and forth between the two of them. Then he raised an eyebrow and said, "What kind of riddle are you two playing?" "It's nothing. I'm just advising you to mind your own business in the future. Some people are very confident in their kidney function." Gordon understood immediately and said, "It seems Bruce's love life has been quite eventful lately." Schiller put down his glass, smiled, and said, "Quite the opposite." Harvey knew some of the inside story. He nudged Bruce with his elbow and said, "Looks like you and that girl you mentioned are progressing quickly. So, have you two officially started dating?" Gordon immediately perked up his ears. Bruce rubbed his temples, looking at the three men's eyes, which seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. He said, "Don't be like that, don't be like that. What's the big deal? That's my private matter. The theme of our party today is to celebrate Gordon's promotion. I don't think the position of Gotham Police Department supervisor is as worthy of celebration as our world's richest man getting a new girlfriend," Gordon said. "That's still a bit of an exaggeration. After all, the world's richest man has way too many girlfriends," Schiller said. "But the police station chief is just like any other police officer." "He's not very useful," Gordon said self-deprecatingly. Bruce was exasperated by them. He said, "Okay, I admit it, it's like this. I've fallen for a girl. No, not that kind of liking. Not because of her pretty face and figure. Oh, she's certainly pretty and has a great figure, but not." Gordon and Harvey both had an "I don't need to explain" attitude. Harvey even said, "At your age, when I liked any girl, I didn't think it was because of their looks. But now I know that's bullshit. Every man in the world who says that is bullshit." Gordon tugged at his tie and said, "Could it be that there really is a girl who is Bruce fallen for her? I'd really like to see who she is." Bruce said, "She wasn't anything special. She was just a girl from the slums, like any other ordinary girl, who loved sparkly gems and jewelry and dreamed of having a castle filled with jewels." "Do you prefer German or French castles?" Schiller asked. "I think Neuschwanstein Castle is quite nice. How about we buy it?" Bruce, unable to contain himself any longer, flicked his glass. He said, "I'm not hitting on her. I'm serious. Don't look at me like that. I admit I was a bit. Well, not a bit. But I really intend to marry her. You're not facing her right now, so there's no need for these nice words." Schiller quickly interrupted Bruce's prediction, asking, "Can just anyone say that? But it doesn't really matter. Batman is the main character, so it shouldn't be a big deal if the main character says this." Bruce took a sip of his drink, looking unusually excited. He said, "We're definitely in a relationship now, and we've been dating for several nights in a row. She gave me a really beautiful gem." "And you? Didn't you give her anything?" Harvey asked. Bruce said, "I'm thinking about it." "That's a bit rude," Harvey said. "Are you looking down on her slum background? Forgive my bluntness, but not everyone is as lucky as you. I think, at least for you, class shouldn't be an obstacle to love." "Of course, that's not what I think. The problem is, if you don't quickly give her a gift to show your feelings, she might think that way," Schiller said. "Any girl from the slums dating the world's richest man probably wouldn't feel very confident." "Okay," Bruce said. "What do you think I should give her?" "I've been thinking about it for ages, and I still can't come up with anything." Harvey didn't know Catwoman's true identity because he didn't know Bruce was Batman, nor did he know their story. But Schiller was fully aware of this. Schiller said, "How about a pearl necklace?" Bruce tightened his grip on his glass, took a sip and said, "I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of pearl necklaces, but if she does, I'll definitely get her the best one." After the party, Schiller went back to his apartment to clean himself up, except for the smell of alcohol. Schiller's shift between DC and Marvel wasn't without reason. After arriving at DC, he wanted to experience the Marvel storyline firsthand, while also making sure to settle things here on time. He was a fairly cautious person who wanted everything to be properly handled. Although it was somewhat unexpected that the old principal hadn't gone to jail, his original purpose in returning was to clean up the mess left by the Jonathan case. The old principal has now become Batman's target, and Schiller doesn't plan to get involved for the time being. But there is one more person, namely the missing Commissioner Victor. Schiller knew that Sal Maroni must have kidnapped him. Even so, Maroni might not kill him. A former police chief could extract a lot of useful information. Maroni had suffered such a great loss that he wouldn't let Victor die easily unless he could recoup his losses. But Schiller had to kill Victor. In the early stages of the Jonathan case, his abilities were insufficient. When he stole the fear gas, he only used the simplest method, which was burglary. However, at that time, he could not completely leave no trace. Although he eliminated 99% of the traces, he still had to eliminate the remaining 1% possibility of being discovered. In an effort to exonerate Jonathan, Victor entered the evidence room more than once. This veteran policeman was the only one who could potentially expose Schiller's theft of the fear gas. It's important to know that after Jonathan went to the mental hospital, the most traditional version of the tear gas concentrate became unavailable. However, due to Maroni's massive losses, many gangsters had their eyes on this weapon. Once someone revealed who stole the tear gas, the gangsters would swarm in like sharks smelling meat. Schiller had planned to visit Maroni, but before that, an unexpected person approached him. Schiller followed a man in black into the car. A man in a suit sitting in the front said, "Professor Schiller, you don't need to be afraid. The Godfather asked you to come over because he needs your help." The extended luxury car quickly arrived at a manor not far from the South District. Schiller followed the guide inside. The manor was decorated in an old-fashioned style. After he went inside and went up to the third floor, the guide knocked on the door, and a deep voice came from inside. "Please come in." Schiller went in and saw a tall man, or rather an old man with silver-gray hair, wearing a well-tailored suit and a bow tie, with a red poppy pin to his breast pocket, exuding an air of quiet authority. He fumbled for the ring on his hand and said to Schiller, "Professor Rodriguez, I apologize for bothering you, but I've asked you here because I need your help. It is my honor to serve you, Your Excellency Falcone." Schiller walked over and stood a table away from Falcone. Behind him was a floor-to-ceiling window, with two bodyguards in black standing on either side. Falcone didn't say anything. He nodded and then stated his request directly. "I have a son who is getting on in years. My family and business need him to carry on. I would like to hire you as his tutor." Before Schiller could ask any questions, Falcone said, "His previous tutor was shot 3 times in the chest and did not survive. I heard that you can even get Bruce Wayne to hand in his homework on time, so you should be a good teacher candidate. Of course, I'm not threatening you. I know you've gotten into a little trouble in Metropolis. Some people followed the smell and found this place, but they should all be in the drain by now. This is my sincerity. What do you say?" Schiller looked at Falcone, who resembled the early DC Comics portrayal of the mob boss. Falcone was inspired by Corleone from The Godfather, the character created by Marlon Brando. Now it seems that, compared to the image of Falcone in the jacket and strange sunglasses depicted in movies and TV series, this old man does indeed look more like a family godfather who rules over Gotham's vast criminal empire. "Okay, but I have one more request. The previous police chief has disappeared," Schiller said. "You want to find him?" "No, I want to kill him." Falcone sat down, took a cigar offered to him by the person next to him, took a puff, exhaled the smoke and slowly said, "Victor, I know him, a clever old swindler. What grudge do you have against him? I think that in Gotham, it's not that you can only kill someone because you have a grudge." Falcone smiled, holding his cigar, and said, "It seems you would indeed make a good teacher." This Falcone is based on early DC Comics designs and can be understood as the Corleone godfather of Gotham City. Just imagine Marlon Brando's image, since it was initially drawn based on The Godfather anyway. Chapter 43. God Bless Gotham. Sar, like his partner, was a bit shrewd. I remember the first time I met him. He was a greenhorn who had just arrived in Gotham, leading a few men to extort cargo ship owners at the docks. Before long, he caught the eye of Lauren from the red light district. That redhead took him around that area, and they quickly bought their first bar. That was more than 20 years ago. Falcone sat in his chair, smoking a cigar as he recalled. Sar won't let that police chief get away with it. Even if he tries to get some information out of him, he'll eventually die. You can try a different approach, like asking if there's anyone else you want to kill, or any other trouble you want to resolve. My troubles come from the metropolis, so I won't trouble the Godfather. Falcone glanced at him, his eyes slightly darting around, and said, Those guys I helped you deal with seem to be quite influential. Who exactly have you messed with? Schiller looked up and said, Your Excellency, I think I might be the longest-living tutor your son has ever had. Faulkner tapped the table with the end of his cigar and said, You work for me, so of course I won't let trouble come your way. But you've gotten involved in those strange things yourself, and now you're hiding here. Aren't you afraid I'll drag the Falcone family down with me? Falcone turned the chair around and said, When has the Falcone family ever come ashore? From the day I arrived in Gotham, I knew that we were all wrecked ships in a sinking, and we would never be able to get ashore. Then he sighed softly. But my son and I have different ideas. Falcone Jr., also known as Evans Falcone, was different from the old Godfather. He was full of passion and believed that he could restore order to Gotham on his own. Yes, although he is the future heir to a mafia family, he does want to restore order to Gotham, but this order is built on violence, not on creating a true utopia. To be honest, his thinking might even be more normal than Batman's. Absolute violence brings absolute authority, and absolute authority controls everyone. The only question is whether Falcone Jr. actually has that ability. After a while, the butler knocked on the door. Evans stood behind him. When he came in and saw Schiller, he was clearly taken aback for a moment, then turned to the butler and whispered, Do you remember me mentioning recently that I forgot to bring my homework or forgot to hand it in? The butler shook his head, and Evans visibly relaxed. Schiller stood up and said, Evans, you two know each other? Falcone asked. Father, this is my university professor. I remember mentioning to you that I have to do a psychology assignment. Before Falcone could say anything, Evans said, I'm sorry, Professor. If there's anything wrong with my recent assignments, it's probably because I've been a bit busy and neglected them. If you're not satisfied, I can rewrite them immediately. Then he moved his lips and turned to Falcone, saying, Father, things in the Eastern District have kept me quite busy lately, and perhaps I've neglected my studies. I'm truly sorry that Professor Schiller is visiting you. Schiller realized that he had misunderstood, thinking that Schiller was there for a home visit. In fact, Evans was terrified. He had long heard of Schiller's infamous reputation, that wherever he went, death would follow, that he was a serial killer and stamp collector, that he had berated Bruce Wayne in class for not handing in his homework and had even given him an expulsion notice. Schiller, the homework-obsessed professor, was famous throughout Gotham University. No professor had ever demanded that students submit assignments so strictly. Anyone who dared not to submit their assignments would be subjected to a barrage of sarcastic remarks in his class, even if you were Bruce Wayne, the chairman of the Gotham University Board of Trustees. But Evans never expected that he would actually run to the godfather of the biggest mafia family in Gotham and come after him for homework. Evans sighed inwardly. Has this professor gone mad? No wonder he berated Bruce Wayne like a drowning dog, and even the new principal, Selden, avoids him. As the heir to a mafia family, Evans originally didn't believe those ridiculous rumors, but now he really does. Who would come to the Godfather's house for a home visit if they weren't mentally unstable? It's not surprising that Schiller cared so much about assignments. His mindset was still stuck in his previous teaching style. You see, many students can't memorize those thick psychology books, and they often don't get high grades in the final exam. If they want to pass, they can only rely on their participation score. But if they don't even do their assignments and don't get any participation score, their pass rate will be terribly low. If the pass rate is too low, his evaluation will definitely be affected. Although Gotham University doesn't have any reliable professor evaluation schemes and no one cares whether students pass or fail, Schiller was used to it in his previous life. He felt that he hadn't even used 30% of his strength, and the students at Gotham University who had received a happy education since childhood had already broken their defenses. If you threw them into the university where Schiller taught in his previous life, just one class essay would be enough to overwhelm them. Those students wrote 20,000 words for short essays and completed their major papers to the standard of publishing a book. Therefore, he couldn't understand why someone couldn't even write enough words for a short essay that only required less than 3,000 words. Moreover, English essays generally have fewer words than Chinese essays. A standard 3,000-word essay would only have 2,000 words. How could they not submit it? So after Schiller used all sorts of methods to frantically catch up on assignments, 3/4 of his students were finally able to hand in their assignments. This included Evans, who was actually one of the better ones. He handed in almost every assignment, and each one was long enough and of decent quality. He even got first place 2 or 3 times. Schiller felt that such a good student deserved praise. They were both freshmen, but look at that good-for-nothing Bruce. In his 2,000-word paper, a third of it was filled with transition words, another third with meaningless modifiers and descriptions, and the rest was just the and a. While others only wrote 2 characters distance between dashes, he wrote a whole line. And yet, he still had the nerve to ask Schiller to bail him out. Falcone frowned slightly and said, "In that case, how is Evans doing at school? Are there any problems with his homework? What about his test scores?" Evans took a deep breath and Schiller said, "Actually, quite good. I've heard Anna, who teaches advanced mathematics, talk to me about it. Evans is quite good at science. At least I'd be willing to give him a graduate program. He also has a talent for psychology." Evans breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing his son's performance, Falcone said directly, "Professor Schiller will be your tutor from now on." Evans felt a chill run down his spine, but he dared not question his father's decision and could only say, "Yes, father." Falcone, holding on to the armrests of the chair, stood up and said, "It seems I need to deal with all the trouble you brought from the metropolis." Schiller shook his head and said, "This is a big problem, and I don't think the price I'm paying is worth it for you to do this." Falcone said, "Being my son's tutor is certainly not enough, but if you become a friend of the Falcone family, we will take care of any trouble for our friends. There's a huge, dark vortex behind Metropolis that no one can imagine. I escaped from there, but I lost a lot. Gotham doesn't need to get involved in Metropolis's affairs, does it?" Falcone shook his head, took another puff of his cigar and said, "You don't know me well enough, sir. 40 years ago, I came to Gotham alone, and nobody had ever heard of the Falcone name. 30 years ago, I became the master of 3 streets, and there was no such thing as the Falcone family. I don't want to boast about my achievements, but I ruled Gotham for 40 years, ruling this city that was once called Hell." Falcone pressed the end of his cigar against the table, smoke rising from between his fingers, and said, "So all you have to do is answer yes, and all the trouble you've ever had will be gone." Schiller looked at him, and Falcone's expression was calmer than Schiller had imagined. Schiller thought that this Falcone was clearly not the villainous underling Batman in his early days in the comics. He was the undisputed godfather of Gotham, the uncrowned king of Gotham City. Even without Batman, Gotham City has never been peaceful. This godfather ruled the city for 40 years, and such a person could not possibly be as foolish and short-sighted as depicted in the comics. Finally, Schiller stepped forward, kissed Falcone's right hand, and said, "God bless Gotham, Godfather." Schiller emphasized the last word, and Falcone noticed the subtle difference, but he didn't mind. No matter how glorious he had been over the past 40 years, the Godfather had truly grown old, and the heirs of the Falcone family were far from mature enough. Falcone thought that perhaps the era of no king in Gotham was about to begin. Chapter 44: Unlucky Selden. The next day, Schiller finished his class and collected the homework on time as usual. But today he found that all 32 assignments in the class were neatly handed in, and judging from their thickness, they all seemed to have been written to the required number of words. He found it strange. Although he usually urged students to hand in their homework very often, there were always 1 or 2 people who didn't. Among those who did hand it in, many were just doing a sloppy job, writing a couple of pages with a bunch of blank paper in between, or simply copying some article and handing it in. But this time, as he stood on the podium and glanced through the papers, he found that everyone had actually written papers seriously. Although some of them were not very well written and clearly showed that they had never written a paper before, at least they tried to stay on topic. Although their wording sounded like that of a desperate, illiterate person, at least they tried not to go off topic. The students didn't dare to breathe when they saw him flipping through homework. Usually at this time, when get out of class was about to end, the students would be packing up their things, but now no one moved. They all stayed obediently in their seats, waiting for Schiller to speak. The reason for this is simple. Just last night, the whole class knew that Schiller went directly to Falcone, the kingpin of Gotham's underworld, in order to get Evans to do his homework. Before Batman existed, let's call this era the pre-Batman era. In this era, the person with the most power in Gotham was Falcone and the 12 gang families under his rule. Just how powerful are these gang families? Sal Maroni, the East End tyrant, is nothing more than a lackey of the Lauren family, which ranks last among the 12 gang families. The Falcone family ranks first, and the old godfather Falcone has absolute authority over the 12 families. In this era, you may not know who the mayor of Gotham City is or even who Bruce Wayne is, but you must know the surnames of Fangul and the other 12 mob families, or you simply cannot survive in Gotham. Ever since they learned that Schiller had gone all the way to the godfather of Gotham to chase after homework, all the students' homework catching up process last night was quite thrilling. Schiller was unusually pleased, so he said, "The situation with this assignment looks promising. It seems everyone has completed it quite diligently. After I finish grading these assignments, I will give everyone an extra 10 points for participation. For the few who did particularly well, if you don't intend to pursue graduate studies, you can come to my office to discuss letters of recommendation." To everyone's surprise, a burst of enthusiastic applause suddenly erupted in the classroom. It was unclear whether it was for Schiller's promised reward or for their own survival. All of this was observed by Headmaster Selden. Selden, to put it nicely, is persistent. To put it bluntly, he's stubborn. Once he sets his sights on someone, he'll find a way to get rid of them. Although Schiller's tough stance prevented him from acting immediately, he was always looking for an opportunity. The principal could access surveillance cameras in all classrooms at Gotham University and observe teachers' lectures, a feature that became Selden's best way to monitor Schiller. In the following days, all the students in Schiller's class were as quiet as chickens. Evans took on the role of class monitor, collecting, handing in, and distributing homework every day, and organizing classroom discipline. The entire teaching situation was well organized, and no one could find any fault with it. This gave Selden a false impression. When he worked in the academic affairs office at Princeton, most of the students were at this level. After arriving at Gotham University, he was busy establishing himself and didn't take the initiative to understand the students' level. In his view, doing homework was the students' duty. Although Gotham University's ranking was not as high as Princeton's, it seemed that the students' quality was not much worse. At least that was the case in Schiller's classes. Selden was focused on observing Schiller's class, where all the students were quiet and completed their tasks well, which allowed Schiller's teaching plan to proceed smoothly. So Selden had another idea. As is well known, his campus alcohol ban was stuck in a limbo. Most of those who are willing to follow the plan have handed over their alcohol, but those who are unwilling are the diehards. These people would rather resist with guns than let the school interfere with their right to drink. Students could resist with guns, but Principal Selden couldn't force them not to drink at gunpoint. He wasn't a native Gotham resident. His thinking was still stuck in civilized society, so the plan was stuck in a rather awkward position and couldn't be pushed forward. When he discovered they wouldn't accept the penalty drink, Selden tried to offer them another toast. Before taking on administrative roles, Selden was also a professor. He graduated from Oxford University with a degree in modern literature and had taught at the University of California and Metropolitan University. Selden felt that to control Gotham University, he had to connect with the students, and being as popular as Harvey was a good approach. Therefore, he wanted to teach a course himself. Coincidentally, Gotham University has almost no literature department, only one professor who teaches a basic course, and the literature and philosophy majors have not been enrolling students for many years. After all, this damn place really has no soil for literature and philosophy. Selden's plan was to revitalize the literature department and lead the revival of the literature major. If he could recruit a group of literature students he taught himself, he would have his own loyal followers in the school. And it seems that Schiller's classroom is very comfortable, and the teaching objectives are being implemented well. In short, the weather has cleared up, the rain has stopped, and Selden thinks he's doing well again. Although he was a university professor, the process of teaching his classes was not much different from teaching elementary school. Selden was like a cloud player watching a video, watching Schiller teach from the other end of the monitor, feeling very relaxed. Schiller's teaching process was simply to walk into the classroom, wait for the students to sit down, then take out his textbook and begin lecturing. There would be 1 or 2 discussion sessions in between. After the discussion, either Schiller would ask questions or a group would send someone to speak. After the presentations, Schiller would give a summary and then talk about some other content. Near the end of get out of class, he would collect the homework, and at the beginning of the next class, there would be a review session on the homework. This was how university classrooms were in the 20th century. There were no fancy slides, and most teachers simply read from the textbook. This was especially true for subjects like psychology, which required a lot of memorization of theoretical knowledge. If you didn't explain the book thoroughly, you couldn't expect to understand anything. The process, as seen in the classroom video, does indeed appear to be quite easy. If the students cooperate, they can even finish the learning objectives ahead of schedule, and then chat for a while towards the end. After the students became unusually obedient, Schiller was willing to talk to them about the crazy killers he had encountered. Although Schiller could not remember many details due to amnesia, these legendary experiences still fascinated the young boys. They discovered that this exceptionally strict professor did indeed have his extraordinary qualities. When announcing the establishment of the Faculty of Arts, Selden dismissed the teacher of the basic literature course and began teaching it himself. Like most casual gamers who watch video games, they feel like they could do it themselves while watching the videos, giving wild advice from a godlike perspective. But when they actually get into the game, they get utterly annihilated, quit, delete the game, and ask for a refund in one fell swoop. Selden was no exception. Once classes actually started, he discovered that Schiller's classroom was a complete illusion. There wasn't a single obedient student there. The foundational literature course and the foundational psychology course were somewhat similar in that they required a lot of memorization and writing papers. When it was the first time we handed in homework, out of dozens of assignments in the class, only 2 were submitted, and one of them only had half the required number of words. Selden, displaying his tough political style, vehemently criticized this behavior of not handing in assignments in class, so when the assignments were due the second time, not a single one was handed in. For example, some people are naturally interested in science courses like math and physics, but for tedious and boring courses like basic literature, no Gotham University student would pay attention. Students do all sorts of things in class. Sleeping is considered one of the better hobbies. Some eat, some chat loudly, some pound away at their game controllers, and some even smoke weeds in public. No matter how much Selden shouted, no one paid any attention to him. Even when he stormed out in anger, the class simply turned into another chaotic study session. Selden also didn't understand Gotham. If he had, he would have known that the students were already good enough, and that the people in this city who could go to college were already of a very high caliber. In this city, there are no gun threats against classmates, no physical bombings of schools, and no kidnappings of teachers and professors. Gotham students can be considered the city's model of civility, but Selden was still furious with them. In particular, many students knew that Selden was the one who came up with that damned prohibition, so they started protesting in Selden's class. Some people brought a whole case of champagne, uncorked it in the front row, and sprayed it all over Selden, even organizing drinking parties in class. Selden shouted that he would deduct credits and expel them, but the group didn't care at all. Selden expelled 2 students, and the remaining students became even more crazy. As a result, one dark night, Selden was walking in the school when he was hit on the head by 2 bottles thrown from the bushes by someone and ended up in the hospital. He couldn't understand why the students who were as well behaved as quails in Schiller's class turned into crazy extremists in his class. Perhaps he simply hadn't heard Schiller say, "Here, the only ones who can deal with criminals are criminals." Chapter 45 words are more powerful than fists. On Schiller's first day back in Marvel, New York, Peter arrived at the clinic looking dejected, with a sling on his arm. Schiller looked him up and down and said, "Your trip to the West doesn't look like it's going very well." Peter sighed, sat down opposite Schiller, put his backpack on his lap, and accidentally bumped his injured arm. He yelled, "Ouch!" and then sighed again, saying, "Putting everything else aside, I might really not be cut out to be a superhero." "What's wrong? Did you run into a tough opponent?" "The opponent is actually not difficult to deal with at all, but..." Next, through Peter's account, Schiller hears about his hilarious and absurd journey through the West with Captain America. Steve is a veteran with rich experience, but as Captain America, the team members he has been assigned to in the past are all elite soldiers who have been tempered by fire. Even the new recruits are not lacking in various combat skills, but they just lack some practical experience. But Peter the Spider is a complete blank slate right now. He fights using thuggish boxing techniques and defends mainly by relying on his physical strength to tough it out. Not to mention any tactical awareness. To train Spider-Man, Steve deliberately didn't let S.H.I.E.L.D. arrange the schedule, but instead took Peter with him on the trip himself. The first problem they encountered on this road trip was Peter's insatiable appetite. Peter's spider mutation growth period is not over yet. He needs to eat a lot of food every day. Even though Steve is rich, as anyone who has watched some road movies knows, it is difficult to guarantee that you can eat at a suitable place every time. Most of the time, he just buys some fast food and carries it in his backpack, taking a bite when he is hungry. But Peter had such a big appetite that he finished all the food they had brought in their backpacks in less than 2 meals. So the 2 of them had to change their plans and, after taking the first bus, went to the nearest town. Prices in this small town weren't high, but Peter still spent over $1,000 on food. Credit cards weren't accepted here, and Steve's cash quickly ran out, so their road trip, which hadn't even begun, came to an end. Steve had to call Coulson to bring him the money, but in the end, S.H.I.E.L.D. drove them both to their destination and also solved Peter's meal problem. Since Schiller led Spider-Man and Pikachu to raid S.H.I.E.L.D.'s food supplies last time, they urgently developed a new type of compressed dry rations with nutrient solution, which can provide a large amount of energy beyond what ordinary people need. This prevented the embarrassing situation of Peter eating up all the restaurants along the way. Once they arrived at their destination, Steve began leading Spider-Man to investigate the ninja's tracks. Although Peter learned a lot in the process, he still messed up most of the things. He possesses superhuman strength and resilience, but he has one major flaw. He's talkative and hyperactive. At first, when Peter didn't understand anything, he was fine. He just obediently followed Steve around, watching how he investigated information. But later, after Peter learned a little, his talkative and hyperactive genes, which were always restless in his bones, started to act up again. Peter learned a few tricks, so he felt he could do better. When Steve wanted to climb over the wall, he jumped onto the top of the wall. When Steve wanted to get close to a security guard and knock him out, he climbed over the roof, jumped in front of the security guard, greeted him, and then punched him in the face. In short, two guys with completely different combat styles messed up the entire reconnaissance operation due to their lack of coordination. Fortunately, the ninjas seemed certain that no one would come to the desolate west, so their trail was relatively easy to find. Before long, Steve and Peter managed to locate one of their small hideouts. What happened next was even more speechless. Originally, they were only going to deal with a few low-level ninjas. Steve's estimate was correct. Their trip was just a warm-up. Although those ninjas could jump around and disappear suddenly, they were not actually a threat. The problem lies in this disappearance. Steve swings his shield, and the ninja vanishes, only to be followed by Peter, who was trying to scare the ninja and make a face at him. The hard shield struck Peter's arm with a loud bang, fracturing it instantly. This was the first time in Captain America's life that he had fired on friendly forces, and the effect was outstanding. Steve told me it would be better to attack these enemies from behind, so I swung across the roof beams, trying to ambush them from behind. But then he switched to a frontal attack. I never knew he was so strong. I was sent flying and slammed against the wall. He took down those ninjas in just a few moves, but he knocked me down in one hit, Peter said pitifully. Schiller couldn't help but laugh, and Peter said resentfully, "Laugh, laugh. I've been laughed at by Coulson, Natasha, and Matt for days since I got back." Schiller tried hard to suppress his laughter and comforted Peter, saying, "Don't be sad. You should feel honored. The last person to be sent flying by the captain's shield like that was the head of Hydra. I know I talk a lot, but I can't control myself. I just get excited and start talking like this. You may have heard the saying, sometimes words are more powerful than fists," Schiller said. After a while, Steve didn't come, but Natasha did. The female agent said with a headache. Stark went to talk to Director Nick and ran into Steve when he came back. The two of them got into a huge fight. "Then why did you come to me? I can't separate them." The director has already had someone separate them, but the problem now is that Steve keeps bringing up Stark's father, and Stark refuses to believe that Steve is his father's old comrade in arms, Captain America. Or rather, he believed it but just didn't want to admit it, Schiller said. Natasha covered her forehead and said, "In short, as a senior psychological counselor at S.H.I.E.L.D., you have to step in and mediate now." Natasha sensed that Schiller was about to refuse, and said, "Listen, here's the situation. Iron Man and Captain America are arguing fiercely, and Nick Fury wants to mediate, but the two of them team up to insult him. Coulson also wanted to step in and mediate, but all three thought he was siding with the other side. Nick thought Coulson should help him resolve the conflict. Stark already knew Coulson was a big fan of Captain America and thought he would definitely take sides, while Captain America thought Coulson was a good person and shouldn't be misunderstood by the other two. Simply put, the three parties each have their own version of events and do not trust each other. But there is really no more credible fourth party to be found on the spot. Obviously, Nick wants them both to join S.H.I.E.L.D., which is why things are like this now, right?" Natasha was somewhat surprised by Schiller's insight, but she still said, "I think this is a good solution for everyone. After all, if the two of them go their separate ways, a lot of problems will arise, like what happened with Steve and Peter this time. But clearly, the problems with Steve and Peter's operation were Peter's fault. Not Captain America's, Schiller said. Peter's resentment deepened. He said, "Hey, doctor, you were just comforting me." Schiller said, "When it comes to mediating disputes, I have a better candidate." As he spoke, he grabbed Pikachu, who was sitting next to him, by the neck, lifted him up, and threw him into Natasha's arms. Natasha grabbed Pikachu's two little paws and held it up to her face, saying, "I know you have a talking yellow mouse, but what good is that? Can't even beat the weakest of the three." "Nick," Schiller said, "believe me, sometimes words are more powerful than fists." Several hours later, when it was dark, a loud banging sound came from outside Schiller's clinic. As soon as he opened the door, Steve, Stark, Coulson, and Natasha were all there. Pikachu was being held in Iron Man's arms, who was wearing armor, while Stark tightly covered the yellow-haired mouse's mouth with his hand. Schiller opened the door, let the group in, and said, "You'd better not get photographed doing what you're doing right now, Stark, or the animal rights organizations will go crazy." "No animal rights organization would protect a mouse like this," Stark said, roughly grabbing Pikachu by the tail and tossing it to Schiller. Coulson looked 10 years older, and Natasha leaned against the doorframe again, saying, "Doctor, you've really provided us with a very effective solution." She spoke through gritted teeth about the words, "very effective." Schiller handed the phone to Pikachu to charge, and Steve sat down, rubbing his forehead, saying, "God, I have no idea what just happened. I thought Peter was the noisiest person in the world, but I never expected." As he spoke, he showed a pained expression. Clearly, the recent barrage of abuse had brought even the good-natured Steve to the brink of collapse. "He really is the noisiest person in the world, because Pikachu is a mouse," Schiller said. "It used the most vulgar language I've ever heard in my life to curse everyone present. Nick couldn't even get a chance to say a word." Speaking with a Canadian accent, it cursed S.H.I.E.L.D. from top to bottom, from Nick Fury's eye patch to the glass of water on his desk. He talked on and on for at least 6 hours, without repeating a single word. His voice practically etched itself into the walls of S.H.I.E.L.D. "I don't know how such a small body can hold so many words," Coulson said, his voice trembling slightly. "To shut him up, we had to feed him, but he ate a month's worth of donuts for the entire office and drank all the beverages in the juicers. To stop him, we all had to take matters into our own hands. He also electrocuted 4 cell phones and an Iron Man suit," Natasha said. "This included one of Nick's high-security cell phones, which he now has to go to the repair shop to recover the data. But at least the mediation worked well, didn't it? When you all teamed up to catch it, didn't you feel the joy of unity?" Schiller said gloatingly. Stark, who suffered the most severe losses, gritted his teeth and said, "Yeah, I never imagined I could chat with this old fogey for half an hour about how to cook rats. I think you now understand what I often say." "Yes?" Steve spoke first. Then Stark looked at him, sparks flying between them, but they still said in unison, "Words are more powerful than fists." Thank you so much to Eon Fei for the generous donation of over 20,000 Chidian coins. "Thank you so much. Boss, you're awesome."